change, and since so much of the culture is having problems with much bigger issues, I'm going to focus on the bigger issues. You want to lose 10K to run, lose 10 pounds to run better, I'm fine with that. But remember that weight loss, people seem to think that the adult body fat percentage is something that they personally are completely in control of. Am I making sense? That I can be 6% fat and I can be 30% fat. And I'd like to say that I don't believe that. That nature tends to assign for each one of us a percentage body fat that the adult maintains with the greatest of ease. And you really don't get to change that. It's somewhat like stature, to be quite honest, right? That many of us would like to be 2 inches taller or a little bit shorter, and you're not in charge of that. So one of the things I'm not talking about today is the body fat that you're simply walking around at day after day. As long as it's in the normal range, I cease to care. You may walk around, all of you are fine-looking young people, and the main thing I would recommend that you not do is accumulate pounds and pounds of fat with each passing decade. That's where the diseases come from. So, with that kind of protracted preamble, because my computer is slower than me, I'll start. Hey, there we go. So, we're going to talk about bioenergetics with particular reference to fat accumulation. One of the points I would make is that in this area, numbers are actually your friend. That I'll show you some mathematics as we go along. I'm not trying to confuse or complicate matters. I'm trying to show that for the most part, this is stoichiometric. If you put someone on a 500 calorie deficit per day diet and have that continue for weeks and weeks, they tend to lose 1 pound per week because there's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, and you've put them on a 3,500 calorie deficit per week, right? So here are some of the things I said at the beginning. This is just a review of what I said, that if you want to change human fat stores, you must offset the amount of calories expended versus coming in, so that you have a negative, you have an expenditure greater than consumption. And that has to go on for weeks to months. The reason why everyone wants to argue and say that is because, has anyone ever done this? Has anyone ever gone into a calorie deficit and held it for a month or two? Dancers, wrestlers, they're here, right? How fun was it? Kind of sucked, huh? Right, because your hypothalamus is monitoring 5 to 10 different variables. And if you go into calorie deficit, it lets you know about it. I love, there's a word you guys have invented, hangry, right? Hangry, there should be tired in there too somehow. Tired, angry, and hungry, right? I want to point out that people who spontaneously, who lose weight without effort, who just weight falls off of them, that's really bad. They need to see a doctor. The likelihood they'll be dead in 2 years is like 80%. It is not natural. If someone sold me a supplement and I suddenly lost weight without hunger or effort, I would make sure that's not a poison, quite frankly, because that's breaking millions of years of evolution. Something's wrong. Let's see. This is my biggest beef with Dr. Oz. By the way, burning more fat is just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a healthy lifestyle. The problem is that he keeps saying, intervene on one side of a balance equation and automatically you'll lose total fat. No, it won't. Not until you address the feeding behaviors. Normal people who expend an extra 1,000 calories in a day eat 1,000 calories over the next 24 to 48 hours. Making sense? So it's fine to expend more energy. It's just not going to result in lower fat scores. Yeah?
When you say spontaneous fat loss, is that like...
No effort. Happens without you thinking about it. The single exceptions are a boxer trying to get in shape for a big match, or a woman as she approaches her wedding date and her gown is a little too tight. Those two groups will actually tend to lose weight without a lot of conscious thought. There are unconscious behavioral things are happening. Spontaneous, meaning it just fell off of them.
Yeah.
Not, I became a vegan last week, and since I became a vegan, I've lost some weight. That's different. That's the intervention. Okay? You won't like this one either, but the fat burning zone is completely irrelevant to whether or not you lose fat. I don't know how else to say that. There is a fat burning zone. You guys know about it. It's around 30 to 50% VO2 max. Most of the fuel being used at that time is fat, and yet working in that zone does not reliably result in total fat loss, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so when we talk about actual human fat loss, exercise is really an adjunct. It helps. Where exercise is absolutely critical is people who continue to exercise on a regular basis do not undergo that creeping collection of extra body fat with each passing year that is such a problem. So exercise is absolutely critical for maintenance. People who exercise do not gain nor lose weight. But for actual creating fat loss, that's another thing I don't like about Dr. Oz. He seems to imply that if you simply exercise, you will lose weight. Drew, you exercise a lot. That's why I pick on you. You losing weight every week? No. So, last point, and we'll move on. I often have people say they're going to quit exercise, and I say, why are you going to quit your exercise program? They say, because they haven't lost any weight. I want to scream and tear my hair out. Because they're measuring the wrong variable. That there are thousands of measurable, their insulin their resting insulin is lower, their sensitivity to insulin is higher, their blood pressure is lower, their inflammation state is low. I could measure 1,000 things in my lab that are healthier, and they're looking at the stupid scale. So it discourages me when people, the story about focusing on the tree instead of the forest. He's lost the forest for the tree. Think about that a little. I have no desire for any of you guys to change your body fats at the end of this lecture. I do want you to understand. So let's talk a little bit about resting metabolism. One of the most copiously proven, it's so funny, you'll run into this for the rest of your clinical nutrition life. Even though the demonstration that resting metabolism, or low resting metabolism, is not the cause of obesity, every obese customer you ever have will come to you with that preconception, right? And so, in fact, at the obesity treatment clinic in Sacramento, they do a resting metabolism on every person who comes in. Not because they're abnormal, to take away that hypothesis from the patient. So, let's talk a little bit about resting metabolism. We already did earlier. Something like 70% of it is the quiet purring of cellular membranes, maintaining their ionic balance and such. This is proportional to the lean mass, right? The more cells and greater size they are, the more energy you spend. So this is where, Terme, you asked me about resting metabolism. Yeah, if you have 10 or 20 pounds more lean mass, your resting metabolism is higher, but it's in proportion to your lean mass. Then the other three, calories, this is the thermic effect of feeding, about 10% of the calories we take in a day go into digestive process. So secreting enzymes, peristalsis of the gut, proton pumping in the stomach. Making sense? You've had all this stuff, right? This is familiar? Yeah. And then these two are the most closely connected to physical activity, because that one there is the thermic effect of activity. And that's the most variable on a day-to-day basis. And then, of course, the EPOC, the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, is some fraction related to the workout. Remember that if you rode 200 miles in the Davis Double Century in a day, then your EPOC will be quite large. If you're doing your routine workout, your EPOC tends to be 1 or 2% of your total energy. Is that all okay? You mentioned it before. Okay. So, I've taken low impact exercise to its logical conclusion. Does this exercise involve any moving? Only at the molecular level. Okay, that's resting metabolism. We've got it. That's what resting metabolism is. So resting, this comes from George Bray's book on the clinical treatment of obesity, it's showing you the lean body mass, the fat-free mass, the lean body mass, graphed against the resting metabolic rate in calories per day. Once again, I'm showing you massive amounts of importance. The elephant in the living room in terms of metabolism is how much non-fat, how much lean tissue you have. Right? Now, what's interesting is in this group, it's a mixture of obese people and regular people because he studies obese people. So there's a mix in here. And notice how they're all thought, if obesity was if low metabolic rate was the cause of obesity, all the obese people would sort of fall off the line, right? Per unit of, everybody falls on the same line here. So, another thing that, Dr. Oz always talking about, rev your metabolism. The only thing that will really double metabolism that I'm aware of in a human is exercise. You can get 10% bub if you combine ephedrine, caffeine, and theophylline, you'll vibrate. But if you're really looking for a significant increase in expenditure of energy due to metabolism, it's exercise. That's all it is. Activity. So a lot of people get lost in this variability. So this says 82%, so there's 18% residual variability, just like with strength, where there are people who have higher metabolisms than other people for the same level of lean mass. I'm not saying that doesn't occur, but this is the big determinant. This effect of lean mass is so, I know what I'm supposed to say. Notice that men and women, anyone ever hear women have lower metabolisms? Has anyone ever heard that? What does this say? They have the same metabolism. Women are somewhat smaller creatures. Right? I mean, to go to her and tell her she has a low metabolism when it's higher than, I think there's 300 dots here. It's higher than all but about 9 males. That seems dumb to me. Another thing, you guys hear about how old people have a low metabolism? You heard that? You get old and your metabolism slows down? There's actually an ad on TV. I got old and my metabolism slowed down. No, you slowed down. If you did a biopsy and tested the cells, the metabolism is just what it was. What's happening is the lean mass is shrinking in old people. And so if you've lost 20 pounds of lean mass, that's 10 kilos, indeed, your total calorie requirement has dropped by over 500 calories. Does that make sense? That loss of lean mass with aging, we'll talk about on Friday. It's called sarcopenia. And while it is to some extent unpreventable after age 60 or 70, the early phases of it that happen in adult life, exercise prevents. I should have lost 20 pounds of lean mass by now at age 60. I have lost 2 pounds of lean mass. I freely admit I'm having to hit the weights harder as part of my exercise program. But as far as that goes, I guess what I'm trying to say is all of the effects usually ascribed to gender, to sex, or to aging are really changes of lean mass. That's what's driving it. So it's a good way to think about, and the effect is so powerful that my students in EXB 104L, a lab class that is no longer taught, were able to measure their own resting metabolisms, measure their own, remember these are beginning scientists, measure their own lean body masses and actually get a regression that matches that pretty perfectly. So it's not a mystery. So that's resting metabolism. If you want it, at the end of this lecture, many people say, how do I know how many calories I need each day? It's very much proportionate to your lean mass. So if you happen to have had a lean mass measurement where you measure body fat and you know your total body weight, subtract off the fraction that body fat is, you'll know your lean mass, and it's about 28 kilocalories each day for every kilogram. Or if you're a pound person, imperial measurements, it's about 14 kilocalories each day per pound of lean mass. If you don't know your lean mass, I'll tell you a quick and dirty way. Use 20% as your fat mass. So take your body weight, subtract off 20%, and for most of you, that'll be quite close. It will underestimate Chris's lean mass because he's a skinny whip. And a few of you, it will overestimate your lean mass, but for most of you, that'll hit it really nice. Oh, the other thing, the most accurate, do they still do this in Nutrition 10? Where you actually just write down everything you eat for 3 or 4 days. I throw away the first day because there's always an intervention, a measurement error where just you're aware of it, so you change yourself. But by the 5th day, you don't care anymore. You're just writing down what you eat. Analyze that and see how much you eat. That will be your energy expenditure in a day. Now, you know, have they given you the Harris-Benedict equations? So you guys, you don't have to know these. Don't memorize these. I put them in for your fun. But if you wanted, I'll do all 3 of these and then take the average as my expenditure. They'll be very close. They'll be within 50 calories. But here are equations generated based on weight, height, and age that give you your resting energy requirement. Now there's one trick to all of these. These are all, this one is giving you your daily total activity. If you do this one and this one, what they're giving you is your energy requirement to lay in a chair all day, to lay reclined. And so if you actually want to know, there's a certain amount of energy associated with tying my tie and getting here or walking across campus, usually that comes out to about 25 to 30% more than whatever these two spit out. You have to then add 20 to 30% to account for what we call daily activity. All make sense so far? That's a fun thing to do. If you have never done that, do that. I mean, I can almost do it in my head. You could run a little whip like Dania on 1,500 calories a day if she didn't get up and move around. If Greg was here, Felipe, you guys are up towards 3,000. It's very much based on size. Okay, let's talk about exercise. Questions so far? Oh yeah, right there.
How do you
Katie.
measure the resting metabolic rate?
Well, if you ask me how I measure it, put a thing in someone's mouth, clip off their nose, hook them up to a TISO tank, collect all their expired air, and calculate it directly. That's the
So
stone.
it's like the RER.
Yeah, measure the oxygen consumption plus the RER, and you can calculate it very precisely. So as we talk about exercise energy expenditure, a few things. There's some, I can't believe that it's 2018 and I still have to tell you that spot reduction doesn't work, but some concepts will continue to recur. Does anyone know what the idea of spot reduction is?
Like trying to remove,
Go ahead, keep going, Zach.
trying to remove weight from your abs or your
Yeah, so if I do crunches, the idea that somehow my rectus abdominis muscles will suck fat directly from my abdominal flat fat. For those of you who are anatomists, that would mean there would have to be a portal circulation. That means 2 sets of capillaries in a row, one capillary in the fat pad to release the fat, and then another set of capillaries directly in conduit into the muscle. Well, it doesn't exist. You can't do that. Fat is removed into general circulation. And so there's numerous, I have to say, there's about 50 different studies showing that spot reduction doesn't happen. I think I'm going to show you my favorite one, but if you don't believe me, I'll show you the other 49. And that is tennis players, especially in the days before a lot of people did the two-handed backhands. Look at this fellow here. Look at his forearms and tell me which arm holds the racket. Can you see it? He's a right-hander. See those big muscles compared to that? This just fills the sleeve. It's cosmetic. When you analyze the bone and muscle therein, you usually find about a 20% increase in bone density, not length, but density, and muscle mass in the racket arm. Now, if spot reduction was true, see, because we got this perfect situation where the same amount of calories is going in and blah, blah, if the only difference is one of these limbs is highly active, what does that mean about the skin fold thickness in these forearms? It should be less. And it turns out, you just read, there was, however, no significant difference in the thickness of subcutaneous fat over the muscles receiving more exercise. Direct evidence against the validity of the concept of spot reduction. There's biopsies, there's all kinds of studies that show that doesn't happen. If you wanted to know how many calories you're spending during exercise, as long as you're doing unaided locomotion, you can use roughly 100 calories per mile. Human locomotion costs about 100 calories per mile. It's remarkable, it doesn't matter if you run it or walk it. If you run it, you run a 10-minute mile, well, you expended 100 calories in 10 minutes. If you walk it at 2 miles an hour, it takes you 30 minutes to walk a mile. It's still about 100 calories. It's really remarkable how little the effect is. I know you guys won't believe me on that, and I think I can show you more data. It's true that Felipe to walk a mile costs more energy than Gania, just because he's a bigger critter, and so for him it's going to be more like 110, or for Michael 110 per mile, for Gania more like 90 per mile. But it's remarkable, in the slop of calorie counting, 100 calories a mile works just fine. A second way to know your energy expenditure during exercise, and I'm going to give you examples of each of these. I'll actually calculate them. Is if you know the external work that's done. So you're like maybe pulling on a Concept 2 rowing ergometer, and you can put it on watts. And it'll tell you how much external work you've done. Well, because human efficiency is about 25%, remember 75% of the energy is released as heat. Well, if you've done 200 watts of external work, that means the total amount of energy released was 800 watts. Make sense? And then all you have to do is convert from joules per second, that's what a watt is, into kilocalories. We'll do that. It's easy enough once you know how to do it. A final way to calculate the energy cost of your activity is to figure out the METs. So how many multiples of the resting metabolism you're doing. Oh, Moses.
I have a question about that, since like cycling can be measured in watts.
Yes.
And they're like pro cyclists can put out like 300 watts and hold that for a long time.
Yes.
They don't eat, like say I can only do 150, they don't eat twice as much as I do. It's like scaled. Why is that? So like
I'll show you the actual curve, but because the exercise, remember, if you and a cyclist are the same basic size, we have to go find one that's your size. Your basal level of food intake for you, it's going to be about 250 kilocalories, is the same. And so, and then when you look at their activity, if they're doing 1,000 calories in a ride, it's this much more. So see how that isn't a doubling, that's what's happening. And I'll actually show you that. We have that study coming up in 3 slides. So good for you. If you take METs, this is a good one if what you're doing, if you're a very small person or a very big person. So three METs against Dania's, gosh, what are you? 45 kilos is different than 3 METs against Michael's 90 kilos. And you can do the math and figure out how many kilocalories each hour you're using. Trust me, I'm right. It's my job. When I retire, I'm going to be one of those guys at the circus who gets that. So let's actually use this. We're going to just practice. I ran 5 miles after class today. How many kilocalories did you expend? 500. And then for those of you who want to, if you take a little person and they're going slow, it might be 80. If you take a big person and they're going hard, it might be that. But again, within the range of what most people do, 100 plus or minus, you know how big you are, you can round up and round down. Okay? Here's another one. I pulled 200 watts on a rowing erg, but I could only hold it for 10 minutes. This is actually pretty true for me these days. So, how much energy did I use? Well, if I pulled 200 watts, my total expenditure was 800 watts. Watts are joules per second, so I can convert joules to kilocalories and then get the units of time right, and I discover about 115 calories. Most of you, when you work out in something kind of chewy, you're going to hit close to 90 to 100 calories every 10 minutes. Once you've warmed up and you're ready to kind of go, you'd be surprised. It's 90 to 110 kilocalories each minute of sustained effort with a heart rate around 160. All okay? Last example, we're going to use the MET procedure. There are huge tables that will give you the metabolic cost, here's the METs, for various kinds of activity. And Moses just meant cycling. So let's do me. The only thing I changed was my body weight. I'm more like 80 kilos, but it made the math easier for it to be 7, plus I felt better about myself. So I go out for a 2-hour ride, and let's see, I could usually be faster than 15 miles an hour unless it's a hill. 19, that's only on a downhill. I'm somewhere between these two categories, not drafting. So let's call my MET use 11. 11 METs for a happy 2-hour ride. So multiply that, METs times my body weight. Oh, here, I did use 80 here. I guess I got honest at the end. 80 kilos times 10 METs. Oh, it's the same as 11. Got it. It comes out to 1,600 calories. So as Moses is saying, you go out for a 2-hour bike ride and you maintain your effort, you use a lot of calories. Now, I want you to keep this in mind because we're going to start to cut to the chase about, so this person did one workout with this deficit for the day. Is that person going to lose body fat?
Maybe.
I like the maybe. Because you're implying there's missing information, right? They have a large deficit. We have to understand what their mouth is going to do over the next 48 hours. Is everyone tracking that? Okay, so let's go on to, this is hard for you. The fuel source, the energy, burn fat, God, I heard someone, there was a personal trainer in my club talking to a client, and I just about attacked it. If you eat fat, you get fat. If you eat protein, you get muscly. And if you burn fat, you get skinny. God, I just want to hit him in the head. So, they didn't go to UC Davis. That part of the reason we have a metabolism is to be able to interchange molecules of different macronutrients and use some as fuel, some as you can synthesize protein. Most of the amino acids in the body, except for the, how many essentials? 8 essentials, can be synthesized. So, whatever he said, no. So, here's the problem. You don't need to use to expend more body fat than you ate in a given day to lose body fat stores. What you need is a calorie deficit. So, which one of these uses more fat? Sleeping for 8 hours or running for 30 minutes at 8 minutes? Sleeping by a large fold. And what I'm driving at, the student came up after I used this example, so I should sleep more. The point is that if, do you know an average intake of fat grams for a day? Isn't it like 80-ish?
I don't know the grams, but I think it's something like average intake.
Yeah. So if you look at the amount of fat used in most exercises, it's tiny compared, it's a fraction, 20-30% of what you're going to eat in a day. So it's not like you put yourself into a total fat deficit with the fat used of exercise. And you actually expend far more like 90 grams, half of the fat intake in a day is going to be used while you're sleeping after the last meal. That making sense? Here's the next experiment. This is the cyclist we just did, this is me, who expended 1,600 calories in cycling. Add that on to my 2,400 calorie maintenance for a day. Look, I used 83 grams of fat just in the cycling. I probably use another 83 during the rest of my day. Are you with me? This is a 4,000 calorie deficit. Am I going to lose weight? No, there's still missing information there. Yeah, so for the rest of that day and into the next day, I ate 4,200 calories. No, I don't do that.
Following exercises, your sleeping metabolic rate increase.
I see what you're saying. Is there like an epoch that's running through the night? And the answer is only if you've really elevated your core temperature a lot, a marathon in the heat, or have a very big mTOR drive with proteins. The basic answer, Zach, is it's so small it's hard to measure, is the best way to answer that. It's going to tend to be in proportion. And to be honest, yeah, it's there. And I measured it. but it's a tiny, it's not why you're getting skinny. It's not why you're losing weight.
When you were saying that if you run or walk like a mile, it will be still like about 100 calories. I remember last time we were talking that like the temperature of the body increases and that does increase your
It does.
metabolism.
And that's part of the extra 10 calories out of 100. It's a small effect.
So small.
I know. It's disappointing, isn't it? By the way, one of the reasons why walk versus run doesn't matter as much is in locomotion, you lift your center of mass with each stride. When you run, you lift it quite high in fewer strides. When you walk, you lift it lower in more strides. And when you add up the total amount of center of mass lifting, it's so close to the same you can't believe it. Shamalu was right. The extra intensity does heat the body and does expend a few more calories.
Can you just also look at that as like kcals per minute?
Yeah.
So it's like, it is dramatically faster in running, it's just that by the time you've covered.
You're done sooner. Yes, exactly.
You don't get the enzymatic changes.
Yeah, we're just talking about calorie balance today. We're not talking about health and fitness and all the health benefits that we'll talk about tomorrow. All right, so here's my last example of, and I hope you can track this. I could just show you results of studies showing that the energy source used during exercise does not lead directly to fat loss. It's just true. But do this one in your head because it helps you review for your exam. So let's say we have a 100-kilo bodybuilder who is 12% fat. Okay? Very nice. And then he is about to begin his cutting phase. Bodybuilders tend to eat liberally when they're making muscle. And then as they get about 3 months before the competition, they radically restrict the amount of calories they have to try to remove the blanket of fat so people can see the muscle they've built. Am I making sense? And they call that the cutting phase. So very often, because bodybuilders don't understand what a treadmill is for, they keep trying to curl it, bodybuilders will often, as they ramp up their energy output, they simply go to the gym more and they start doing like 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 sets. So they're just doing more weightlifting, but they're starting to spend 3 hours in the gym, so you might get a 1,200 calorie weightlifting deficit. That's huge. It's a lot of weightlifting. Now, because this person is so big, they need in excess of 3,000 calories a day just to lie in a chair because they just have so many mitochondria, so many cells. So this is how much expenditure this person does. With me so far? Do we know if they're going to lose weight yet or not? No. So, because this person is an experienced bodybuilder, they then hold their calorie intake, they measure it, and hold it to something lower. Now, can you tell me if they're going to lose weight? Yes, they are. They have 1,000 calories. They're going to be, don't be near this guy. I'm sorry if he's your roommate. You're in big trouble. He's going to be a very mean person who might eat you. But he will lose about 2 pounds a week. Now, for the fuel source thing, tell me when you do a set of weightlifting that lasts 45 seconds, what is the fuel source you're actually using to make the contraction? Cytosolic, lactate production, and phosphagens. Like that. You with me? So he's generating a calorie deficit. Almost all of that is phosphagen-based. However, doesn't he ultimately have to rebuild the phosphagens and rebalance the cell and correct the amount and sleep through them? And that's what fat is for. It is a reservoir whenever the daily expenditure is greater than the intake. Does that make sense? And so it really does not matter what fuel source is used during the exercise. It matters that there be a calorie deficit. Does that all make sense? Okay. So, I hope I can finish this lecture. Yeah, 10 slides. So why would just exercising, again, exercise is a very poor method for losing fat. There's one case in which it works pretty well, which is if you've been totally inactive, say after an injury, or you've been inactive your whole life, and you begin to exercise. How many people have ever lost weight in that situation, where you've been inactive for multiple months and then began to exercise? And weight kind of just came off? Yes, I'll show you that in a moment. For the rest, once you're out of that initial startup, then the situation becomes that if you expend more calories, what tends to happen? Mary, if you double your total energy out expenditure, you'll tend to eat twice as much. Is anyone here running 35 miles a week? Excellent, I was hoping. So, if it looks like Dylan and Moses are running 35 miles a week, and one of the reasons I chose that is it's perfect because if you're running 35 miles a week, you're expending about 3,500 kilocalories of exercise, and so you should be losing 1 pound of fat. Is that right? But first, let's check that. Are you guys losing? Have you been losing 1 pound of fat every week? You're not a nation. So first off, if you wanted to, through pure expenditure, create a deficit equal to 1 pound of fat, you would have to exercise 35 miles a week, and many people won't do that. Now we have 2 people in class who are doing that, and yet they're not losing weight. Why? Because they have hypothalami. They have normal hypothalami that will balance their energy intake. So I'm gonna go ahead and just, here are some studies, if you don't believe me, of adding exercise but not doing a dietary restriction. What you find is the weight loss is utterly disappointing. In the 2 situations where there was actual substantial weight loss, this is boot camp, and this is a Czechoslovakian camp for overweight teenagers. And they actually were restricting food. They had altered the composition, the amount, and the time you could eat. So the only studies in which exercise mattered was where you actually messed with feeding as well. This is not radical. The National Institutes of Health, New England Journal of Medicine reviewed something like 1,000 studies looking at various compositions of diet in terms of how much protein, how much weight loss. It turned out that composition didn't matter. Reduced calorie diets appear to have similar effects on weight loss regardless of composition. This is just, I'm not being radical. I'm just being true. It's the internet that's lying to you. So, you ever seen this one, Una? Jean Mayer, not the guy who plays the guitar. That's John Mayer. Yeah. Jean Mayer was a metabolist in France in the 1950s who began to study this. And some of his observations still hold. Ignore body weight in rats for now. Just look down here. These are rats. This is feeding behavior measured as calories of rat chow. Notice when he put no wheel in the cage for the rats, they actually tended to increase their food intake by something like 15%. Very strange phenomenon. Are they eating because they're bored? Are they eating for no apparent reason? I don't know, but humans do this too. Then as you start to replace the kind of physical activity that a rat will happily run 5 kilometers a night if you put a wheel in, as you add wheel time to the animal, first off, they cease overeating, and then they begin to eat in perfect proportion to how much additional exercise you've added. Notice Moses is already looking up at the body weight to see what this is meaning. Notice that this is the change when someone goes from completely sedentary to somewhat active. Again, you will get about a 5 to 10% of your body weight will come out without effort. But then you'll enter what he describes as the range of proportionate response, which is if you have normal activity, if you expend more energy, you will eat more in exact proportion to hold your body weight constant, which is where most of you are. Most of you are not going up or going down. True that? Okay. So here's Moses' question about Tour de France. Saris did this experiment in the 80s. And the interesting thing about the Tour de France is you expend enough calories to run a marathon each day. It's like running a marathon back every day for 3 weeks. Because of the bike, you don't get, if you actually tried to do that with marathons, your joints would explode. But because of the bike cushioning, you can actually do it. So here's the study. That's calorie intake. That's calorie expenditure. Notice, let's find some, these are rest days. This is the prologue, which is mostly a ceremonial ride. Notice on the days, intake and expenditure balance. And again, their resting needs, because they're muscly creatures, around 3,000 calories. So, Then, notice, here's the profile, there's the Alps, here's an early hill. On any day where there's a large amount of extra work, they tend to overexpend relative to their intake. It's hard to eat enough. With me? When you're talking 8,000 calories a day, it's a lot of eating. Then notice when they get a day off, rest day, there is more intake than there is expenditure. Are you seeing it? And notice that as they go on through the week, look what's happening when they start to track closer and closer and closer the further on they go. Over the entire course of 3 weeks, they lost less than a kilo, less than 2 pounds of total weight. That's what normal hypothalami do. They balance your intake to expenditures. I will say, because my friends at the Western Human Nutrition Group then always object and say, but that's not what we see people do when we bring in, I say, and what is their activity level? Oh, well, they're sedentary adults. I understand, I just told you sedentary animals overeat. It looks like, one way to frame this is that the hypothalamus needs a certain magnitude of flux of calories, and if you're lying in a Barco lounger, that's too low a signal. It can't figure out what the appropriate amount of calories would be, and so it errs on the side of excess. All right, so let me cut to the chase because we're running out of time here, and I show you some really tough. Because at this point you might think, well, exercise has no role at all in weight loss. It actually does. There's two. The biggest role of exercise comes after you've lost the weight. It has, or before you've gained weight. Even better, the biggest role of exercise before you gain the weight is it keeps you from gaining weight. I'll show you that in a moment. During a diet, during a calorie restriction, exercise does have a critical role, and particularly resistance exercise. Anyone want to make a guess what that role will be?
Muscle mass.
It helps you keep your muscle mass. Remember, the body has 2 big caloric stores, your fat mass and your protein mass. You tend to, the bigger the calorie deficit, the more you will use both protein and fat. And so in a 1,000 calories, it's why the biggest loser is such a stupid idea, is if you're running 2,000, 3,000 calorie deficits per day, at least 50% of their weight loss is muscle. It's a horrible thing to do. The show should be banned. So, this study's been done 3 times over the last 3 decades. It always comes out the same. Let's check it out. First off, it's about if I remember right, it's about a 700 calorie deficit per day here. Oh, here it is, 900 calorie deficit per day. So they're playing rough. Then notice the control group, let's just check the control group. The control group doesn't lose body mass, doesn't lose fat, doesn't lose fat. Okay, fine. Right. Notice, if you're talking about total body weight loss, there is no difference between the people who are just restricting diet, who are combining diet and endurance exercise, and who are combining diet, endurance exercise, and strength training. There is no change in the total amount of fat loss is in proportion to the calorie deficit. And these setups are what are called isocaloric. Each one of them is creating the same 900 kilocalorie per day deficit. These people are undereating by 900. These people might be undereating by 400 and then walking 5 miles a day. Am I making sense? And then these people are lifting weights, walking maybe 2 miles a day. Making sense? So, what matters here? Notice that of this total weight loss, which is the same in all 3 groups, the fat-free mass loss in the 2 groups not doing strength training approaches 30%. They're losing 1 pound of lean for every 3 pounds. Right? Do you see what's happened with the addition of strength training? So you've sent the body, what is the name of the signaler that's maintaining protein synthesis? You're sending the body an mTOR signal saying, please do not eat my bicep. I am still using it. Thank you very much. And notice that almost all of their weight loss is fat loss. Does that make sense? I will never do a calorie restriction anymore because it's so hard to keep mass when you're older. I'll never do a calorie restriction anymore without weightlifting. Then here, I think I have time for my 2 favorite studies. which is, I think we'll finish with this one. The next one is an NIH-approved controlled study that shows the same thing with more rigorous control. I like this study better because human choice is involved. So this is 2 months of an 800 calorie per day deficit in firefighters, police officers in Boston. So they went and got a bunch of overweight police officers, and they began to lose weight. Notice the dotted line is a calorie restriction amounting to 800 per day. The exercise group, again, it's isocaloric, probably 400 a day of calorie restriction and 500 or 400 per day of exercise. Okay with me? Once again, within measurement error, they lose roughly the same amount of weight. It is the calorie restriction that drives weight loss. Now, the really cool part of this study isn't this. We've known this for decades. The cool part is what happens afterwards. Because the great problem, inducing weight loss in animals is easy, fat loss. The problem is not gaining it back. So as you look, in the follow-up period, people were allowed, officers were allowed to switch groups. So they allowed human choice. Very unusual design. They said, so this group, you could switch. Anytime you see a dark line, someone has chosen to begin exercise. So of the 56 people in this wing, 4 of them adopted exercise in their follow-up period. Of the 54 people who had used exercise, 10 of them quit exercise. Are you following? So blur your eyes, look at the dotted lines. Does anyone see what the effect is of discontinuing exercise in the recovery period? Is it somewhat obvious when you do it that way? And anyone who chooses to maintain exercise tends to arrest further weight gain and stabilize where they are. Okay, this study shows exactly the same thing. It's a little bit more tightly controlled, but it is the proportion of calorie deficit that creates weight loss. Exercise alone tends to be very, very good at arresting the slow cumulative weight gain that people have over time. Is that all okay? Sorry to keep you 1 minute late, but it was worth staying. Thank you. Office hour starts up over at my office and another one at noon.